Hello, hello. Here we are again, coming to you from Broadcast Team Alpha on the Paranormal show, and we're going to have some fun because we're going to go against the stream again. I have a very interesting guest with me and a good friend here in Tucson. And but first, I want to let you know that we are coming to you from 44 different platforms, and we are also transmitting on the Conscious Awakening Network. And you got to go over and have a look at that, because consciousawakeningnetwork.org, they have close to 50 different shows over there, and we are one of them, and we are going live over there also. And if you want to get in touch with us, just get to broadcastteamalpha.com, send us a message, and we'll get back to you. And otherwise, Nori and I created a spiritual think tank where we do incredible things. It seems like we create out of seemingly nothing sometimes. Phenomenal healings are happening for people, economic things are happening for people, just coming out of totally the blue, where nothing was expected, but it shows up. So do you want to be part of something like that? Send us an email to themastermindconnection@gmail.com. And we are on YouTube, and that's the best place you can watch us, because we monitor the chat room. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe and click the bell so you can know when the next video comes out. And the super chat is open if you also want to help us over there. That will be just like a Christmas present in April. So anyway, I have a returning guest to Broadcast Team Alpha, and that's David Collis. He is an author, a researcher, and pretty much everything he does goes against the grain of what people think is normal. And his website is davidcollis.com, and he has written a book called Interviewing Jesus the Man. And his book is on Amazon. Now, there's a lot of people running around out there saying that, that guy he never existed. There's nothing written about him. But yeah, there is actually. There is some in the surviving Roman records. There is one document coming out of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and Pliny the Elder wrote about him, and several others that actually did write about him. So there is enough evidence to know that there is this guy. Well, his name wasn't Jesus, he was Joshua. And he was operating by three names at the time, because Joshua ben Joseph was one, because that's how they say, son of Joseph. And then there was Joshua bet Halachme, which was Joseph's last name. So we're going to have some fun here getting into the corners of history, ancient history. Hey, welcome to the show, David.
Thank you, Aage. I really appreciate you inviting me to your show.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. We were talking before the show, and we got to think about it. Gosh, we should have recorded this. It was fun. You have so much in that book. Paranormal relations to the Bible. They talk about the Nephilim, they talk about all kinds of other things. Where do you want to start?
Well, when I wrote my book in one regard to kind of answer questions that I had, because I've been involved with Christianity and studying Christianity for a long time. In fact, I used to have a lot of hair on my head when I started, and so now I just have a gray beard. So anyway, when there was a point in time when I'm going to say back there in 2015 or so, about when I started to realize everything that I've been taught about Jesus, I think that there's more to it than what is in the Bible. So I wanted to go, actually, the New Testament and the Gospels, and I wanted to re-explore that Jesus's personality through his sayings, because I know enough about psychology to be dangerous, and I also know enough that what people say actually kind of reveals something about themselves. So I wanted to explore Jesus's personality based off of his sayings. At the same time, I wanted to recreate Jesus's historical setting and try to put him back into that historical setting based off of his sayings. So we have Jesus's sayings and actions, and then we also have the historical first century Judean time. And those two things came together for me in a very kind of a powerful and potent way. And what we see pretty much in the New Testament is a lot of, I would say, everything seems to stem from a theological point of view. And I wanted to really look at the historical point of view. And so I just put aside all of the kind of the theology for a moment and just really looked at what things would have been like for Jesus and what he was up against. So that's part of the premise that I worked with. And then I also had felt like I had some new and different insights that what Jesus had to say, which would be in conflict with what the theological perspective would have been, particularly when it comes to sin. And I just saw his words in a very different light, and especially with the kingdom of heaven sayings.
Yeah. Yeah, and we also got to remember that the Bible, Jesus did not create the Bible. The Bible was created, the first draft of it was created in 325, and the emperor, which ordered the Bible to be done, he only accepted it on his deathbed in about three, I don't know.
330, somewhere around there. Or
Yeah,
yeah,
something like
fourth
that.
century, the fourth
Mm,
century.
yeah.
Yeah, that particular history I know something about, but I don't, I'm not kind of a scholar on that. In fact,
Mhm.
I don't pretend to be a scholar on any of this. I'm just my own self-guided researcher, and I follow my heart and I follow my mind, and I just let it kind of take me where I want. And usually it's in territories that are unorthodox.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well,
what I can say about Constantine and the history of Christianity is that uh, there were a lot of things that were being written about Jesus in the first century, um, and well, I wouldn't say a lot, but there was a lot, there was material that was being written about Jesus, and then that material then started to be collected in the second century. And then the Gnostics really started to have a say in how things were going to work. So one of the Gnostics, who was up in northern Turkey, started to compile his own version of the letters and the Gospels. And then that got the prototype Christians excited, and they wanted to have their own Bible in competition to his Bible, or his thing, his well, you'd say Bible, but anyway, it's the gospel stories and some of Paul's
yeah.
work. And part of the Christian, or part of the Gnostic tradition, was semi to reject a lot of the Old Testament version of who God was. And so they saw God in a more loving light than the Old Testament jealous God that likes to punish people. So
Hmm. Yeah.
anyway, and then when you get, so now Christianity is spreading throughout the Roman Empire. And as you get closer to Rome, it starts looking more Roman. As you get further away from Rome, it starts looking like the regions that are associated with those particular areas. So when you get
Yeah.
into Egypt, there's a kind of an Egyptian tone to the Gospels. And when you get up into kind of northern Syria area, and then kind of north of and then into Turkey, it gets a little bit more mystical. Whereas the Roman version of things really became more, what would you say, more textual, right? So it's about what the words had to say versus what the experience might have been. And then when you get into Egypt, there's a little bit more about what the words are pointing to and there's more kind of a dimensional quality to that. So and it's a little more quiet. So
Yeah.
as you get to Rome, we're looking at kind of a Roman version of things, and of
Hmm.
course when you get into all the history of Rome and the development of Rome and how Christianity was involved in the Roman Empire, as more Romans started to accept Christianity or Jesus, they had a problem on their hand because in the year 70, well, in the year 66, there was a Jewish revolt, and
Yeah.
that revolt ended up killing and destroying one of the Roman legions. So to say that you were a Christian kind of in the Roman Empire at that particular time was
Not a good thing.
it wasn't a good thing. It was a little on the dangerous side, and it was really kind of frowned upon. And of course, then you had the kind of in the year 65, you had Nero. He was, killing Christians in Rome. Uh,
Yeah.
so anyway, there's a lot of information just as the Christianity was developing that was actually quite fascinating. But I was trying to get through all of that and then kind of get back to the very origin of things. And it was the origins that I found fascinating. But I still have strong connections, to what is being written. I have strong connections to mystical Christianity, which I think is a really wonderful subject and topic and a place to, kind of dig your teeth into and really try to understand. And then the other aspect is having mystical experiences,
Mhm.
which the people of the New Testament were having on a fairly regular basis, and Jesus was too. So, once you start digging into that, that gets into some
Mhm.
fascinating subject as well. So yeah, again, I went back to what Jesus was saying based off of what some of the scholars are agreeing to that would be the most likely things that Jesus said, and they rated it with a color coding, and red was probably certain, red was or pink was most likely, gray was we don't know, this doesn't seem right, and then black was not at all. That was somebody else putting words into Jesus's mouth, and that seemed to be the issue that we constantly come up against, and that is, what did Jesus actually say? And what I felt that what Jesus was saying was actually quite profound and exciting, particularly his kingdom of heaven sayings.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think also that this Joshua, he was well read, he was educated,
Yep.
and he when he went to India,
Yep.
he met some really phenomenal people. After, in fact, he met his wife there, and she came back with him. And when he came back, he was preaching to the Jews and say, "Wait a minute, what you're doing is wrong. Men and women have equal value in front of God."
That's
And
correct.
that didn't go over well with the Jews at the time. No,
There's a lot of things that weren't going well at the time. And Jesus seemed to be bringing in a brand new idea of the divine into this particular set way of thinking.
yeah,
And that didn't go over too well. And one of the things that you just mentioned is that he recognized the power of women and that the women need to have their own voice. And he included them in his ministry.
yeah,
So it wasn't just men. He was
yeah,
teaching, people across the board. In fact, there were some of the women that he was interacting with, and his disciples were very upset with him for actually talking to women without their husband being around. So
yeah,
he
yeah.
was,
And in the old writings back from those days, it was clear that he came back. He wasn't what we are calling in Christianity today. He was more like a Far Eastern, I think, compilation of different beliefs back in the East that he brought with him back.
that was my after I did a lot of my own research, and part of my research went into Greek history, it went into Roman history, it went into Egyptian history, it went into the religions in the um, Mediterranean,
Mhm.
and what I found is that there was a number of sayings that Jesus was talking about that had a direct and very strong link to Eastern kind of mystical thinking. And I even look at his ministry almost completely Buddhist, in that he was
Mhm.
advocating, and he even says it, the more the Father becomes, the less I become. And you'll see that there's a parallel of with that in Buddhism, and that is the dissolution of the ego. And as you dissolve the ego, the more the powers of the, kind of the spirit
Mhm.
uh, kind of influence you and affect you and become a part of you in a way that you're now flowing with the the proper mechanisms, as opposed to, kind of saying, well, this is who I am and this is what I'm going
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah.
It's like he's just kind of flowing with the river.
Yeah, and I think also that because he was so well educated in spiritual writings of the time, he was saying some of the things that was said by others before.
That's correct.
And especially Sextus and some of the others that lived 600 years before the year zero. the He was quoting some of that stuff, and of course the people in 325, they credited all to him because they didn't expect the simple people of the time to go back and read all those old writings. So they felt safe. Now, of course, he's coming out, and we see a lot of the writings in the Bible was first written hundreds of years before and then imported into the Bible.
Um, there is a lot of truth to that. I would like to mention that as I went through Jesus's sayings, I started to ask myself, where's this influence?
Mhm.
And being a Jew in the first century, he has a very strong connection to his past. In fact, his brothers' names were Judas and Simon. I can't remember their. You know what? I'm kind of. I have all this stuff written down, and I don't know if I want to start looking at my notes. So I'm just kind of winging it off the top of my head. Anyway,
Yeah.
two of his brothers. He had four brothers. Two of them were named after Maccabean rebels that
Hmm.
defeated the Greeks a couple hundred years earlier. And so Jesus's family was very righteous, and they understood Judaism, and they understand their Jewish roots very, very well. At the same time, Jesus was a genius, and so he picked up on a lot of spiritual and philosophical ideas.
Yeah.
And those ideas come from Egypt, they come from India, and they come from Buddhism. And they also, his rhetorical style is not very similar. It's not what you would call Jewish. It has more to do with Greek than it does with Judaism. So there
Mhm.
seems to be a rhetorical style, particularly with his aphorisms and how he responded to some of his attackers and his opponents. Had it was more Greek rhetoric. And he
Mhm.
was a great storyteller. So that's the other thing about him that was so fascinating, is that, he was a bit of a poet. At the same time, he was a very strong man, because he probably engaged in carpentry, that we would understand as carpentry, and
Well,
that
his dad was a contractor.
that's what he was, a builder.
Yeah.
So the other thing that seemed very revealing when I started to analyze more of his sayings is that he speaks of money as one of his number one topics. And he speaks in money in such a way that you would think that he was a financier and that he was a manager of an estate. So he talks about taxes and labor, and he talks about good managers and bad managers and products and looking for opportunities and ideas like that. And I thought, this seems more in tune with somebody who comes from money and actually has some kind of business that the family is involved in. And being the firstborn, he should have been at the top of the list to take over the family business. And you see some of that in his sayings.
Hmm.
Also, you have a mention in Luke that his mother was a woman of means. So we have kind of two confirmations there. We have one that was textual, and then the next one was a reference to his mother being wealthy. So
Yeah, she
and
actually,
with that wealth, he had connections that other people would not have had. And I believe that his family sent him away to get educated, and he went to the East.
yeah.
Uh,
And his mother wore a red dress a lot. And that was the sign of being royalty.
was it? See,
Yeah,
now that's a historical detail that I didn't get into.
yeah.
So
She,
the so part of the influences that Jesus was engaged in, not only was it, we look at Eastern mysticism and Eastern religions, we also see Egyptian, and then we also he has a strong influence with the Essenes, who
yeah,
were somewhat out there in the desert by the Dead Sea. And there's quite a bit of influence on that. In fact, as I was reading Josephus about the Essenes, I just started to make a list of all the things that he was saying about the Essenes, and then I looked at Jesus and I went, well, there's a one-to-one relationship between that and that and that and that. Oh, look, there's the separation. It starts right there, on this line.
hmm,
So, and Jesus's separation had a lot to do with what he understood God to be. So,
yeah. Now, we were talking before we got started the show here about maybe what he looked like a little bit.
that's correct.
When you mentioned the Jews, he grew up a Jew, so that was his mentality until, at least 10 or 11 or whatever, something like that. He was embedded in that.
Yes.
But there, back in Europe, before I left Europe and came to the United States, I read a document that was kind of like an appendix or something smaller writing in a relation to the Dead Sea Scroll. It appeared as it slipped through the cracks of the, in 47, when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, they said, oh, this is going to take us decades to translate. Well, they had it done in about a year and a half, but they didn't tell anybody. And some of the papers slipped through and got out, and this is one of them. And I read it, and it said they speak about this Messiah, which there was the Hebrew name for Messiah, and they talked about him, Joshua. He was tall, strong. His eyes was as the midday sky, and his hair as the ripe field of grain. That means blue eyes and yellowish hair. With other words, he was not a Jew. He may, and I've been saying this before, and I'm getting some flack every time, and that is that he may have been of an alien origin, or maybe there was an abduction of his mom, and he was placed here for a purpose. I don't know where to go with this one, but that is not out of my sphere of looking at it.
Yeah.
What about your opinion on something like that?
Well, this is a very kind of interesting topic for me right now. So when I became a Christian, I kind of understood things theologically, and then I decided I wanted to deal with more of the historical side perspective. And so I decided I wanted to put aside all the theological ideas. And I did my own research, quite a bit of research, So like I told you before, I looked into Christian mysticism and Greek history and Greek religion and Roman and Egyptian and Mediterranean. And that was part of my own self-guided tour into this material, and in Greek mythology. So we're going to also kind of touch upon, when we look at Jesus, there is a little bit of Greek mythology kind of embedded into some of the things that he did and kind of the way in which it was told. Um, But there's something that's actually quite fascinating now, is that I actually did another level of research that dealt with the relationship between Shark Cathedral, the pyramids, and the kings of Israel. And for the longest time, I couldn't break that code. And it wasn't until just, I was going to say probably about 10 months ago or 9 months ago, that the first crack in that research in this relationship um, happened based off of my reading of genetics. And then I went, oh, I had an aha moment. If we start looking at genetics in this way, we're going to start seeing something that's actually part of the Bible story. It is mentioned that Noah also had the same look, and that he had to have had a special genetic code for him to be the one to gather up essentially all the animals and build the ark to save mankind from essentially the sons of God and the Nephilim and the fallen angels. So there was that element. And then we see that Jesus, from Hebrew perspective, is that he arrives from and comes from the seed of Jesse. So what we find in the kings of Israel, and what the kings of Israel represent, is they represent this particular seed, and this seed has special meaning. And the special meaning in this case is that in the cycles of time, there was a predestined, there was a foreordained event that was going to happen, of which this person that is now referred to as Jesus would come as the Messiah to restore the relationship that was once, or that was lost, that once was. And so in this grand cycle of time, this prophecy has been with the Jewish, they've been holding on to that particular idea throughout their history, that there would be this restoration between the relationship between God and man. So what I noticed in this research that I was doing is that in the cycles of time, we have really, really severe earth changes and solar
Yeah.
changes that are practically in almost incomprehensible when you really kind of look at some of the facts.
Mm-hmm.
And when these events occurred, there seemed to be a new relationship that people had, whether it was a new beginning, some severe issues like all of a sudden all of mankind got kind of knocked out, and now a new kind of strain had to occur. But there seems to be, at these big moments of earth catastrophes, that there's a new man that kind of shows up. And I think that when you get into Jesus, we see a fulfillment of a time schedule. And with that, we have this kind of a new man in Jesus, with a new group of people who are thinking like Jesus. And that there was a very strange relationship between the divine, right, and Mother Mary, Jesus's mother, and what happened there. So there is a seed with Jesus, uh, with the seed of Jesse and the kings of Israel. And then we also have this other foreign, like divine seed that came and impregnated Mary. And that is now starting to intrigue me, because we have other stories that go back, and we were kind of mentioning this earlier, about the sons of God coming down to earth and mating with human women. So this is the same story. So what happened?
Yeah, maybe Jesus was part of that breeding program.
And that's where I'm thinking that this is where this is coming from, is that there's some other breeding program that has occurred. When you also look into the Old Testament, you'll see that there are different regions that are really strongly influencing the biblical story. So at one time, the biblical story started in Chaldea, with Abraham was being told by a God to leave Ur of Chaldea. which is, right around ancient Sumeria and the Mesopotamian area. Well, um, up north, up in Turkey near Mount Ararat, we have these other people that had blue eyes and
Yeah.
this kind of hair that you're talking about. And so there was this influence in the early Old Testament of that region. And then, of course, as they moved into um, present day Israel, then you have a different influence. And then there was also an Egyptian influence. So the Jews have been influenced by a number of cultures, and they're assimilating all their cultures into their own culture, and then taking and borrowing and using names and things like that 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 they had to make their own.
Yeah.
Because they weren't a large empire. I mean, you had the Mesopotamian empires with the Babylonians and the
Yeah.
Chaldeans and the Assyrians, and then there were the Hittites up there in present day Turkey, and then down in the south you had um, Egypt, and these areas were strong river valley systems. And then you had the Greeks and the Romans in the west, and you also had the Phoenicians as well.
Yeah.
So um,
Yeah. I'm wondering though, we're going down a path here. I think we're going to end up somewhere, and that is that there is talk of aliens in the Bible.
yes,
And when we think about it, back those days, the gods, they came from the sky.
they came from the heavens.
Yeah, from up above. And now, when Joshua said, I am the son, actually, if he ever actually said that, uh, I'm the son of God. And I have no problem with that, because if they are the gods that they're talking about in the first part of the Bible, then I can understand maybe he was part of that.
I'm beginning to kind of come back. So I'm swinging around. That orbit that I started from where I am now have come full circle, but it's taken decades for me to come around. And now I started to realize there's something to this story that is actually very, very profound.
Yeah,
And it is what happens when you have some divine intervention here. And we see a divine intervention at the very beginning of Jesus's story.
yeah,
God impregnates, the Holy Spirit impregnates his mother. We
yeah,
have the celestial events with the star of, what was it, the Star of Bethlehem? We have strange lights. So
yeah,
we have people from the east, meaning the magicians. These were the magicians of the Chaldeans and the Babylonians in that area that are recognizing that the time has come for this to happen. And Jesus was endowed with the ability to heal. And
yeah,
he was able to do things just by touching their hands. So I believe that there is a technology that Jesus was aware of that had to deal with light codes, verbal commands, the whole what we would understand now as vibration and light and color and whatnot. I mean, how else can you just say, if we were to accept the fact that Lazarus was raised from the dead, was Jesus able to do something with his hands and his communication to be able to manipulate a code within the cell structure of this body to make it rise from the dead? To me, I'm now all of a sudden I'm completely 100% fascinated by this subject. Is he
mhm,
the only one that can do this? Or is there something that we can actually access and understand that we ourselves can do? And it's the nature of manifestation now that is kind of um, really interesting, is making me interested and getting me excited. And then
mhm.
if you start to think about what Paul had to say, that we are co-creators, what are we co-creators of? What do we actually do? And so now you have to have a kind of a very, curious mind to recognize the power of the divine, and whether or not the eye of God, the mind of God, and the force, the quote force, works in some way that is only exclusive to God, the Father, so to speak, or are we who are part of this, and this is what the the Hindus are going to say, is that the big self and the small self, meaning the big guy and us, the small self, are one and the same.
Yeah.
How do we take that information and apply it in our lives? I believe that there has been a corruption in the Old Testament and in the New Testament that puts us at a disadvantage by saying that we are filled with sin. We need to be fearful. We need to worship. We need to
Yeah.
provide these, these rituals. And I think that we need to just put that aside and start saying, how do we access the pure energy of the divine in our lives and make it a part of us? Because Jesus seemed to have that ability to do that, and he
Yeah.
did it, and he
Abs-
showed us. So
yeah.
yeah, there's a whole nother thing that I'm coming around to, which I'm very fascinated to understand.
And you mentioned something here about the corruption of the writings, and folks, get your hand get your hands on the notes from the church meeting in Constantinople or Nicaea at the time, from 325, and actually they were there a couple of years, so that's 326. Get your hands on the writings. You can find them on the internet now. I think about a year or so ago, I saw a book on Amazon that had the writings from the notes from the meetings, and you will find they lied about a lot of things that went into the Bible. They quoted people from the past and credited it to their God. It's in their own writing. And when we look at that, Bible, of course, it means book. So they created this book. And I think the order to have it done was given by Constantine, and it's written in some of the old surviving Roman records, when he said he got 223 people, told them, go to Nicaea and create a religion that will unify my empire, and do not emerge before you have done so. Why did he do that? Well, he looked at the Jews and he saw that they were never fighting among themselves. They were totally united. They were peaceful among themselves. He wanted that for his empire. And that's why he told them, go to Nicaea and create that religion. And they did. They went through 9,000 scrolls and old writings, picked and chose from that, and imported it into the Bible. It's in their own writing. So now, that doesn't mean that the Bible is bad news all the way through. No, there's awful lot of good stuff in there, and I highly recommend for people to read it once.
Let me just go back to Constantine. The Roman Empire was so big and so powerful that, you know, somebody like Caesar was able to manage it.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
They needed to break it up into different sections.
Yeah.
And those sections then had, oh, my internet connection is unstable all of a sudden. What do you
Yeah.
know?
But
What do you know?
you're good now.
Okay. So anyway, they divided it up into four sections. And then later they went, wait a minute, we should just kind of go back to one. So Constantine was fighting a civil war against one of
Yeah.
his rivals. And so after he won, and so there was the vision that he had at the bridge. I can't remember the name of it, the like Monrovian Bridge, something like that,
Yeah.
in which he saw a cross, which might have even been an Ankh, which might have been space aliens, right? Right? Who knows?
Yeah.
This is all very fascinating. So with that, he just said, look, we're going to put together a new religion. There's Christianity seemed to be having a lot of influence. I mean, we're looking at maybe there was 30% of Romans who identified with Christianity or more.
A
And
bunch.
so when you look at this on a sociological level, you realize, hey, we got to do something with these people. We can't just keep, massacring them. We got to integrate them into our society in a much more seamless way. So the Council of Nicaea was charged with coming up with essentially a Roman religion.
Yeah.
And now Christianity at that time wasn't just a unified, it wasn't like a proto-Christian idea. No, there was all kinds of ideas that were being circulated. And one was, Jesus was just a man. The other one was, oh, Jesus was only a God. And no, Jesus was both God and man. You had the Gnostic versions of things. Then there was the monasteries out in the Egyptian desert, and they were looking at a lot of Greek philosophy and other Jewish writings. Then you also had the Dead Sea Scrolls. Of course, none of that was. They didn't even know that those Dead Sea Scrolls were around because they were all hidden in the caves near Qumran. So anyway, Yep. So anyway, all of this information had to be sorted and figured out, and there was arguments, and the people that were representing the Gnostics ultimately got kind of knocked out of the game. And then once it became an official religion, anybody that was opposed to that and anybody who said anything different, or if the ideas were different, then that became heretical. And so now you had kind of a Roman seal. The other thing that happened is once the Nicene Council put together what we now have as the Bible, and they went through all their arguments and assembled it, Constantine said, "Oh, look, you can go ahead now and start having priests and bishops, and here are all these buildings. They were basilicas, and they were all square shaped. You can have all those too that are not being used anymore." And then that's kind of like how Christianity became official. Now, the question is, what I looked at when I looked at the Roman Catholic Church in relationship to Christianity, or excuse me, the Roman Christian Church in relationship to the Roman Empire, I started to realize that the Roman Catholic Church is an exact replica of the structure of the Roman Empire. So we have a one-to-one correspondence, and I kind of call it the mini-me. The Roman Church is the mini-me. So if you want to know what the Roman Empire was like, just go look at the structure of the Roman Catholic Church, and you're going to see it. It's all there.
Yeah, that's what people don't know. The Roman Empire never died.
No,
They just changed the name, and it is the Catholic Church.
it
Is the
evolved.
remnants of the Roman Empire. The
That's correct.
structure is
Everything.
somewhat of the same, and the
It's
same top-down absolute control is the
exactly,
same. Yeah.
exactly. From the Pope to the bishops, although the bishops are like the Senate, and then you have the various guards and the Roman army, etc., and then you have all the lay people. So you have all these the different structures, and that's exactly what it was. It was a pyramid top down.
Yeah. When the Roman Empire collapsed in on itself, they wanted to continue in some form, and they were given 0.21 square mile in the middle of what is now Rome to keep all the records of what they had. And that's what in those 10 miles of underworld catacombs under the Rome, I mean, there's miles and miles of bookshelves.
Yeah, I would like to see that.
Yeah, good luck with that one.
So, okay, so here's the thing. So that, the Roman Empire was so big that when the Goths and the Visigoths came in the 4th century and destroyed everything in Rome, the Rome moved over into Constantinople, which is present day Istanbul, and kept on going. And that was the Byzantine Empire. And that empire didn't fall until the Turks took over, with the Crusades. And I think that was somewhere around the 1200s.
12, 13.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that finally fell over, that section. But then in the meantime, the Roman Catholic Church was fully functioning.
Yeah.
In its power.
Well, in its own way, in own tyrannical way, they did.
Yeah.
But there's one more subject I would just love to visit, and that is that a most reasonable thinking today, people, they will have read enough to know that there were giants in the past.
Yes.
They speak about them in the Bible too.
Yes.
let's go there and talk about them a little bit, because these were 9 to 12 foot tall people.
Yes. Okay. So, in the story we have in the Bible, in I think it's Second Samuel or First Samuel, we have David, who was a shepherd boy, and the Philistines have decided to war against the Israelites, and they were pretty much crushing the Israelites. And so anyway, now there's a standoff, and the person, the Philistine, well, I don't think he was a Philistine. I think he was from the place called Gad, and his name was Goliath, and he was 9 feet 9 inches tall. He wore bronze armor that weighed 120 pounds.
Yeah.
Wow, that's wild. Anyway, little David, the shepherd boy, was able to take his sling and 5 smooth stone rocks from the river and hurl it at Goliath and hit him in the head. And he had a helmet on his head. Goliath had a helmet, a huge helmet on his head, and he was able to hit him right in probably the third eye right there, and knocked him out. And then he went over there and chopped off his head. So Goliath is a giant. He's a remnant from something that was going on that he was a descendant of. Okay, so now we have to go back and go, okay, what's going on here? Because this is a very fascinating story. When you get into Book of Genesis, you're going to see that the sons of God, the Nephilim, have come down. Actually, they have come down from heaven to earth, and they mated with human women, the daughters of men, and created what they say as the heroes of old and the men of renown.
Yeah.
So these people, well, this is what's fascinating. These people were considered an abomination. So when God creates man in the first chapter of Genesis, everything is good. And then, things start to unravel, and they unravel fairly quickly here. And that now we're out of the Garden of Eden, so to speak. And the Garden of Eden is not some little place that you would figure is a garden and with trees and whatnot. I think it was like kind of when you look at and read Chaldean and Mesopotamian and Sumerian texts, the Garden of Eden is, or Eden itself, it was spelled E.DEN.
Yep.
That was a giant area within the Sumerian context of things. So it'd be like saying, well, in California, well, there's San Francisco and there's LA and then there's San Diego. Well, that area with all those cosmopolitan areas would be considered an Eden. Well, in this particular area in Mesopotamia, between all these different big cities, that idea was Eden. Wasn't until I think the Babylonians, when the Israelites were captured by the Babylonians they just loved horticulture, and they loved gardens. And so I think that there was a grafting of the idea of Eden and Adam and Eve from that version of the story. But we'll see, again, we're going to go back and we're going to say that the Israelites are borrowing quite heavily from the Sumerian texts,
Yep.
particularly Enuma Elish, and those texts have pretty much the same stories. But then the Hebrew, the Semitic mind, is going to go ahead and kind of make it their own, and then they're going to change some of the stories. But what's not been changed, and this is what's fascinating, is that there still is the Son of Gods. So both the Sumerians and the Semitics still have the sons of God, and these people were not human, and they mated with women. So the offspring of these people were considered giants.
Yep.
And if you go and you start looking at the archaeological and historical records, which there's quite a bit, there are things that are built that are enormous. And these people couldn't have been that size.
Yeah.
I had the good opportunity of going to Canterbury and seeing the cathedral in Canterbury in England. And I was walking down essentially one of their streets, which is as wide as an ox cart, and the doors came to about here on me. They were little. They were like hobbits. That's how big. So the door is, you open up a door and then you have to duck your head. And then when I went into this bar or the tavern, my head was practically scraping against the ceiling. That's how small those people were. Well, just imagine if you saw someone, if that's like kind of the general size of people, where they might have been 5 feet tall, maybe a little more, women would have been even smaller.
Yeah.
How do you account for the fact that there's like somebody like Goliath who's 9 feet 9 inches? It's enormous. And as you mentioned earlier, that when the Israelites left Egypt and they came into the land of Canaan, the Israelites sent out scouts to go scout things out. And they came back, and you can go ahead and tell me what you read. I didn't, that was like one of those stories I didn't get to read, but you said that everything was filled with giants.
Yeah, they were scared coming back, and I said, leave them alone. We are like ants to them.
Right.
And yeah, so they were giants there. And
Yeah. So the other thing that's fascinating to me, so we have a flood account, and so this is a universal flood account. And I believe that there are more than just one. I also believe that the earth has gone through a lot of catastrophes,
yeah,
and that the catastrophes that we read in the Bible are not, let's just say, some of them are accurate and some of them are like made up, but they're only made up because uh, everything that they talk about happened at some other time. And so there must have been this collective memory about the
yeah,
disasters that befell mankind, the flood just being one of them. But I'm reading now people who are scientists that are saying, hey, everything that you see above ground right now, that was all underwater. And what was underwater was above ground. That's just hard to conceive. And
yeah,
if you start thinking about that, what would it take for everything that was under the water to be above water, and everything that was above water now under the water? What would have happened? And what had happened if it was quick? At the top of Mount Everest, 29,000 feet, we have mollusks. And mollusks, when they come out of water, they open up. We have mollusks at the top of Mount Everest that are closed, meaning they were still underwater when the mountain range formed.
mm-hmm.
There are those events in our history that there are trace elements of that we find in the Bible. And even though I don't think that the Bible is 100% accurate, I think that there is still something on an unconscious level that was still part of everybody's thinking, that there were disasters that occurred on this planet. There were strange things that happened in the sky. There were
Yep.
meteorites that impacted the earth. There were floods, et cetera, et cetera. And now we have these stories of giants. I'm now starting to think, and I know because giants were found here in the United States. We have some over there at the border of Pennsylvania and Ohio. We now have a story in the Bible, and now we have the Nephilim or Nephilim. That name is referred as those who come down from the heavens to earth. That's what that means.
Yeah, and Joseph Smith, when he came across the United States, in his diary, he says he ran into and he was able to communicate with giants.
Wow. Well, we know that they're Native American Indians here in Arizona, like kind
Yeah,
of on the border of Arizona and Utah, had to fight with these giants because they were just, pains in the asses. We
yeah,
have really amazing kind of structures, and this is also part of the research that I did, is that we have these incredible structures in the Mediterranean, in
yeah.
Malta, Egypt, uh,
Baalbek.
Baalbek, other places, of which there are stones that are you can't even move them. They're so big, but they were moved. And the
One,
size, everything was size.
yeah, yeah.
We have dolmens. We have dolmens in which it looks like, this is a burial site, and the people are 8 to 10 feet tall.
Yeah.
Something's going on here of which we are not really accepting, but it happened. So the question is, and this is the parallel between Jesus and the sons of God having, mating with the women of earth, is that we have a similar story of sexual encounters by divine beings with humans. Jesus and Mary, or Mary and the Holy Spirit, and this, the Nephilim, the sons of God with human women. We also have similar stories of like what happens with the offspring. Well, the offsprings are actually quite remarkable. To those the offsprings of the sons of God, we have men of renown. With Mary and the Holy Spirit, we have Jesus, the Son of God, the Messiah. We have interesting things that are going on when it comes to intense elements of wisdom and abilities to do things like build structures. And
Yeah.
then you have the offsprings, and then you have kind of the offshoots of those people who are then carrying on this lineage. So we have some very fascinating ideas. Where the things start to separate is like, well, with the sons of God, that was an abomination. With God's plan versus Jesus is the plan, is the true plan of restoration. And so there's that kind of difference. And with the sons of God and the mating of the women, that was an abomination. And so God used the flood to pretty much wipe everybody out, but they didn't. Not all of them were wiped out.
Yeah. And when we're talking about giants, in fact, we have giants among us today. They're not that many of them, but there are some. In fact, there are pictures of giants in northern Turkey right now. They're dressed in fur clothing, and I mean, the pictures of them show that they are about 10 to 11 foot tall. And here a few days ago, I found a picture from Russia, and they had the giant Russian army. They had a bunch of giants, and there's a picture of them. There's normal people standing in front, and behind them there is a row of giants in Russian uniform, and they look like I kind of anticipated the height, and they're somewhere between 10 and 11 foot tall.
Wow.
As well as in the surviving Roman records, they speak of the German giants, which they used in front of the advancing army to scare the chocolate out of the opposing army. They were 9 to 12 foot tall. I did the conversion from cubits, and these giants has been around for a long time, and we still have some of them around. They're not just because that the pituitary has got a fault to it, so it keeps producing too much growth
Yeah.
hormone. No, there's other reasons, the genetic reasons.
Yeah. There's genetics.
Yeah.
Isn't that, I mean, the whole thing is the more I study some of these other alternatives of history, the more I have more questions, and those questions are really perking my interest. And then lo and behold, as I reread the Old Testament and the New Testament, there are trace elements of all that in there. So something's going on that makes me wonder what is truth. Okay, I want to mention this one last thing.
Mm-hmm.
So part of what I did was I just was reading all kinds of material. So I was reading the old Sumerian text, and I was reading the Old Testament texts, and I was reading the Vedas and the Buddhist scriptures and Egypt. And it dawned on me after doing quite an extensive reading that I think that there was some stories that were altered here. And I think that the stories are altered in a very specific manner, and that is to hide from us, our origins, and then how we reconnect to those origins. And that maybe when we do connect to those origins, that maybe the process is not accurate. And those are the big ideas that I'm starting to realize today, is that even the stories that we have been doctored to misguide us and to mislead us.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is well, what is the accurate way of thinking of things? And with your mastermind and some of the, when I read Hermetic ideas and when I read Gnostic ideas and when I read um, the Emerald Tablets, I start realizing that there is so much truth in these texts, and even with Jesus's text and his sayings, that what he said is the kingdom of heaven is within you. That is true. It is there. So the question is how do you access it? And when he says you too can do the same things as me, that is true.
Yeah.
And he says, in my father's kingdom there are many mansions. That is true. That those are dimensions. So we have extraterrestrials. They are in the Bible. We call them angels, right? They're spiritual beings. They're not essentially from here. They're from somewhere else. They live in another dimension. Some help us, some don't. And that there is a reality there that's accurate in truth. And we too have access to that. And what I find that's a little different than what is before is that some of the angels that are mentioned, they're servants of God, whereas we are children of God. And that is something to pay attention to.
Yeah.
We're not
And
servants, we are children of.
in John of the Bible, they also state very clearly, ye are gods. Did you see that? Uh-oh, you
Oh,
froze again.
we froze.
Yeah. Now it does say in John's that you are gods.
That's right. The Father and I are one. That's Hinduism. And
Yeah.
again, it goes back to the big self versus the small self, the Atman versus the Brahman, and they're one and the same thing. So, in an example is if I went down to the beach and I had a bucket and I scooped up there's a wave that was coming at me, a little wave that was coming at me by the shore, and I scooped up part of that wave, the wave is exactly the same as the water. And the water is, you would call that divine, and the little
Mhm.
bucket of me that had the wave in it, that
Yeah.
is, that's the same material, same substance, same
Boy, oh
everything.
boy, we are just down to the end here, but let people know where they can find your books, because we just only scratched the scratch on the scratch that was scratched into the scratch today. So
That's right.
yeah, so there's a lot more controversial stuff where some of the stuff in the Bible is tore apart and rebuilt again. So where do they find your books? And
Well, my book is available on Amazon, and it's called Interviewing Jesus the Man. And I'm really trying to understand the historical Jesus and his historical time. And that's why I wrote it. I do have a website, but almost the entire website is filled with my artwork. So I have, you can find me there at davidcollis.com. And then I'm also on Facebook.
yeah,
So,
oh, this has been fun.
well, thank you. It
Yeah,
has been fun. There's been a lot that we got to share tonight.
yeah.
Well,
And
actually, this afternoon.
yeah, well, I thank you very much for being with us. And we should do this again sometime.
All
There
right.
is so much more to talk about.
There is.
Yeah. So until then, keep watching Broadcast Team Alpha, and until the next show, be good to each other.
Thank you, Augie.
You bet.